President Donald Trump gives himself an A+. A+. It's not the first time he's done it, by the way.
What grade do you give yourself so far?
So I give myself an A+. I don't think any president has ever done what I've done. I give myself an A+.
In Texas and in Florida, we get an A+. And I'll tell you what, I think we've done just as good in Puerto Rico.
I would give myself an A+. Nobody has done what I've been able to do, and I did it despite the fact that I have a phony cloud over my head that doesn't exist.
Joining me now is Republican strategist Rick Wilson. Rick, you give him an A+?
You know, I think the best I'm going to give him, Ollie, is a participation trophy. Look, Donald Trump is a great self-promoter, but there's a level of delusion that comes from this guy sometimes that it just defies comedy even.
Let's talk about the problem with that, though, because if we're not in the least able to be self-critical, this is a problem. The world is sort of closing in on Donald Trump on a million different fronts right now, which we've been covering for the last few weeks. At some point, there might be some redemption in being able to say, all right, I get it. I don't surround myself with the best people. Yeah, I did say that. Yeah, that was really bad. I shouldn't have done that. But the inability of him to do any of that stuff and then move straight into threats and criticism really does sort of harden the opposition to the president in that this guy can't be trusted with important things because he sort of lies about everything and doesn't actually understand where he's getting things wrong.
Sure. Look, introspection is not Donald Trump's strong point. And unfortunately, when you're the president of the United States, you need to be able to look at the broader picture beyond your own personal interests, your own self-interest, your own ego, your own needs, and make judgments about your leadership. And if you think that you've only gotten gold stars and only gotten A+, you're not going to ever change anything. And I think there are a majority of Americans are certainly concerned about Donald Trump's leadership on a whole variety of fronts. Yes, the folks that support him, they think he can do no wrong. But the rest of America is worried that this is a guy who's not terribly stable. I mean, look, waking up in the middle of the night to tweet in all caps is not a sign of confident leadership. It's a sign of a terrified old man who feels the walls closing in. This is a guy who, like I said, there's no introspection here, and I wouldn't expect any to come, because I think he's basically a bluffer, and he's going to continue to try to double down on this I'm perfect, the rest of you are lying theory, regardless of the facts of the cases.
Your book is called Everything Trump Touches Dies. And the everything that is, really we're hoping that's not America. But the Republican Party, a party of which you have been a member, we are seeing some Republicans, very, very few. Congressman Tom Cole told the New York Times that where there's smoke, there's a lot of smoke. There may well be a fire. But generally speaking, we're not seeing Republicans break from Donald Trump in the way that at around this time into the Nixon administration, when Watergate was big, we were starting to see Republicans move away because Nixon was becoming an albatross. There's something about the politics here that's different.
Sure. Look, the future of the Republican Party is a big gamble right now. It has become this party of Trump, and it's got a self-reinforcing media silo. It's got the Fox News side and the Breitbart and the online cheer sections for Trump that now sort of terrify rank and file Republicans from saying anything about this guy. They're afraid of his social media power, and so you end up in a situation where the party has become subsumed by Trump's fortunes, whether they rise or fall, and they, like I said, it's a big bet that they've made. I think it's a terrible bet because I think my theory plays out constantly and consistently. I mean, Paul Manafort and Michael Cohen, on paper, should now be masters of the universe, but instead they're both convicted or they're both admitted felons.
Yeah.
So,
Rick, can you ever get your party back?
You know what? It's going to take a really hard shock. It's going to take some really serious work, and it's going to take some introspection on the part of leaders who so quickly collapsed in front of Trump because they thought that that this nationalist populism and statism that he advocates is going to be the wave of the future.
Hey, MSNBC fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there and click on any of the videos here to watch the latest interviews and highlights. You can get more MSNBC for free every day with our newsletters. Just visit msnbc.com/newsletters to sign up now.